The smoke weed thing is a weird one because it's
I was surprised to learn this. I'd be curious what your thoughts are. I'm not a cannabis smoker. I just never really liked it. But I had a guest on my podcast named Paul Conti. He's an MD, mainly works on trauma, incredible trauma therapist, and has written about trauma, wrote the book on trauma that I think is the one in my opinion. And then we got into a discussion about like different substances and do they have application. So we talked about ketamine, et cetera. Asked about alcohol, just by way of comparison. And he said, there are basically zero therapeutic uses for alcohol, right? Therapeutic.
Right.
But then I asked about cannabis. Now, this isn't something he does in his own clinic. He does talk therapy, not drug therapy, although he's a psychiatrist, so he can prescribe things. And he said, cannabis is interesting, and it may actually have some therapeutic potential, but the main effect of cannabis is to narrow attention and focus. It actually can increase attention and focus. Now, the problem is it's not a very good filter, so people can narrowly attend to just video games or just to their anxiety if they're already anxious. That's a problem. But when it comes to psilocybin seems to increase creative thinking, new rules and algorithms about what could be an answer. So I'm not aware of how it might directly impact visual perception unless it narrows focus. But most of the drugs that impact serotonin are going to increase focus to some degree or another. And that can be good if what you're focusing on is pleasant. It can be really bad if what you're focusing on is really unpleasant. I knew people, I'm sure you don't, who just smoke weed and they have a panic attack.
Yeah, the smoke weed thing is a weird one because it's like many things. It's completely dependent upon the individual, like their individual genetics, their biology, whatever it is that they've had in their past. I know people that smoke marijuana and they're high functioning, and I know people that smoke marijuana and they don't get anything done. And I don't know if they're related. Those two things are related. I think people who generally have drive and discipline, marijuana gives them a break. It gives them a nice just a little rest stop. And I think that's probably beneficial. And I also think it makes you a little kinder, a little more compassionate, a little more sensitive, which is probably very beneficial to someone who's hyper-focused. Like people that are like type A personalities and trying to get things done all the time. You smoke a little pot and you're like, what am I doing? Like, let's fucking relax a little. And then you get back to it. You're all right. I think there's a great benefit to that. But I should also say that it's very popular in the jiu-jitsu world.
Oh, yeah. I always thought that had something to do with the kind of creativity part of it. Like that you can't plan jiu-jitsu.
Right.
You have to improvise.
Yeah,
it's like jazz.
In a lot of ways. There's definitely that, but it's also the focus thing, that you're only thinking about that. Like while you're rolling, you're really only thinking about rolling. While you're smoking cannabis and then rolling, you're hyper-focused on it.
And physical strength, you feel fine. You don't feel lethargic or anything.
No,
like
not
that.
at all. I actually enjoy it. I actually enjoy it when I lift weights too.
Oh, I haven't tried that one.
Yeah, I feel it. Like I feel it in the fibers. It's almost like I'm more aware of like what's going on instead of like this blunt sort of almost like distance from each individual muscle fiber, which I am normally. Normally, I'm just trying to warm up, and then I warm up, and then I start getting going, and then I, lift light first, and then I work my way up to what I normally use. But when I'm high, it's like I could feel like where it connects to the bone. I feel everything. It just makes you more sensitive about what you're actually doing. And for martial arts techniques, particularly for striking, I feel like I incorporate leverage better into things. I have better balance in terms of like not trying to execute a technique when I'm off position, and it just makes me just more aware of like what's going on with my body.
And that's super powerful. We had the nerd in me wants to say, in neuroscience, they call that interoception. Like people vary tremendously in their awareness of their internal state. You can know if you have a high or low degree of interoception by trying to count your heartbeats without taking your pulse. Some people can just do that. It's a skill you can build up over time. This is great for some people, but some people are highly anxious. It sucks to have a lot of interoception. But we know, of course, that the mind-muscle connection is really powerful. And it's not just mind-muscle connection as a whatever they call bro science thing. The reality is that from peer-reviewed studies that if people focus on the contraction of a muscle during resistance training as opposed to moving the weight, right, something that's hard to measure if they're actually doing it, the strength and hypertrophy gains are much greater. I think it's like a 15%. I had Andy Galpin on the podcast, and he would know the exact number. But I always wonder about this, like in gyms where there are mirrors and people are watching themselves lift in the mirror. I mean, you're exterocepting. You're not focused as much as you could on the actual feeling. So, there's always a weighting between exteroception to the everything beyond the confines of your skin and interoception. And if cannabis allows more interoception, you can imagine that those workouts would be more effective in that way.
But isn't